Good afternoon or evening, ladies and gentlemen, boxing fans around the world. This is a continuation of the Lifeblood of Boxing series. I haven't done one of these in a while, and I'm getting some catch up as I've been following boxing news and updates and interviews and whatnot. And I did today's update as a follow on for Mr. Gary Russell Jr. After this, of course, I went back and I was watching some other interviews that happened, and it caused me to remember I hadn't covered another fighter that I intended to cover a long time ago. And then, of course, the Basic Cryptonomics podcast and our site, cryptotalkradio.net, if you want to check that out. But I needed to go back to this. I needed to go back to the lifeblood of boxing because this fighter defines the lifeblood of boxing. I'm going to go back and I'm going to add the other two. I've done Sean Porter. He's up there. Take a look at that one because I do recommend it. Of course, that preceded the Crawford fight, but I had a suspicion that he was on his way out. That's why I did it. But there's a number of ones that I've done. I'm going to be putting those up there. Ted Cheeseman, I've got one for him. I've got one for Deontay Wilder. And then today's fighter I'm going to cover, Mr. Randall Bailey, the Knockout King. Randall Bailey, I don't think he gets enough credit, not just because of his knockout power, but because of his storied career. This guy has done a lot, and he's fought some of the best. He's fought champions. He's been a champion, and he fought as long as he thought made sense. His cousin is now in the boxing business and kind of picking up where he left off. And then Bailey disappeared, and nobody knew what happened to him. He disappeared from the business. He actually retired roughly 2 years ago. He never really announced it to the world that he officially retired, but he did retire from the business 2 years ago, and it was largely driven because of the way, things weren't going his way in fights he was trying to do, and I'll get to that in a second. But I want to just kind of give a summary of this guy. This dude, he rose in the 90s, so he rose up, he went pro in the 90s, and so he went pro roughly around the time that I grew to be a young lad myself, and he was just knocking guys out. He was explosive, and he never got the real exposure I think he deserved because his first world title, which happened in late 90s, close to 2000, nobody expected him to win that fight against the champion. Not only did he win the fight, he knocked the guy out in the first round. So but he still wasn't regarded. He still never got the recognition. I don't think it was until like his mid-career that he got kind of recognition, but he was knocking guys out that nobody would expect should be able to knock out as easily as he was doing, and he would just catch you with shots that nobody expected this. He takes a loss in 2000. Enter Julio takes him out. Enter Julio is most known, in my opinion, by losing to Chop Chop Corley. This is in 2001, 2002, I think it's 2002. He loses to Chop Chop Corley. I'm not going to say Chop Chop Corley's a bum because he's not. But at the time that Enter Julio lost to Chop Chop Corley, he should not have lost that fight because Enter Julio was actually a very solid fighter, and I believe that he just allowed the Randall Bailey win, which allowed him to get the WBO title, to go to his head. And so then he never really was in the fight. He had fought Chop Chop before this, and it went to a split decision. People thought Corley got robbed. This is for the USBA title. People thought that Corley got robbed. And so the rematch was really kind of to settle, put it at rest, right? So he beats Bailey, gets the title, and then it's a close win. But the point is he beats Bailey, then proceeds to take a loss to Chop Chop Corley, and he's never the same after this. After that, he's pretty much done. Now, I want to just talk about 2000 to 2010, let's say. 2000 to 2010 is one of those glory span years of the boxing business. You had a lot of solid, dangerous fighters in the divisions in super lightweight, welterweight. You had a lot of dangerous fighters, but specifically in super lightweight and lightweight. You're talking the likes of Zab Judah. You're talking the likes of Floyd Mayweather. You had Cotto. He was down there at the time. It was a very exciting time. All the way to Junior Witter and Devin Alexander, who I'll come back to here in a second. It was kind of the glory era of the business. And so when you see guys like Randall Bailey and he's in the mix and he takes this loss and it's the first time he loses the belt, but people are like, okay, what happened here? And did Enter Julio, is it a robbery? Nobody thought it was a robbery. It was a close fight. But Enter Julio, in my opinion, he was not in Randall Bailey's class. Despite him getting his hand raised, he wasn't in Randall Bailey's class at all. Bailey didn't let it stop him though, because he went on. The dude goes on. He's a light welterweight now. He goes on. Hurtado comes in the mix. He beats Hurtado. He gets a vacant title, 2 vacant titles actually. The IBA was there at the time. And now he's back on this track. However, he's starting to step up in competition. So now he's fighting Chop Chop Corley. He takes a loss to Chop Chop Corley. This is 2003. And just so you can contrast exactly what we're talking about here, Randall Bailey is right there with Floyd Mayweather in the same super lightweight or lightweight and super or junior welterweight rather mix. Floyd's right there. And the reason that I say that is because Floyd would eventually fight Chop Chop Corley, right? And so now you get a very interesting mix. Floyd fought Chop Chop Corley in 2004, the beginning of 2004. Bailey fought Chop Chop Corley in beginning of 2003. So they're right there, parallel. Now, Bailey is not the same fighter at the top level as he was at the lower levels, but he's still a dangerous threat. He's still able to knock guys out, but it really depends on who he's in there with. If he's in there with somebody who is a stylistically superior boxer, he's not able to get that knockout punch, but he's still in the mix. He's just not able to get the knockout. So when he fights guys like Corley, Corley is a stylistically superior boxer, arguably at that time. This is prime Corley we're talking here. Ishe Smith, he's not quite prime, but he's still he's more defensive. He's more evasive and elusive. He's hard to hit. So he's not able to beat Corley. He's not able to beat Smith. And then he runs into Miguel Cotto in 2004. So now Floyd is going his path. They're still parallel. Floyd's going his path. Cotto's coming in, fights Bailey. Cotto beats Bailey, actually stops him in 6. And this is a WBO. Now, the thing with Cotto has always been a very precise fighter, a very defensively sound fighter, whose only shortcoming, you could argue, is against guys who are aggressive and go after him, or guys who are just faster than him. Bailey was never faster than guys like Cotto, although he's more timing, right? He's tricky. He can catch you with shots. So people looked at his resume around this time, and they're like, okay, well, is this guy all hype because he can't seem to win the big ones here? And what the heck's going on? No, the truth is that as with every fighter, there's always somebody who can beat you, unless your name's Floyd Mayweather. There's always somebody who can beat you. And in the case of Bailey, it just so happened that anytime he was paired against somebody who could outbox him or was defensively sound, it takes away his biggest weapon, which is that power shot and his timing. If the guy's faster than you or the guy's a better boxer than you, then the timing doesn't matter because you see the shots coming. So if you look at the remainder of his career, his biggest win, arguably, is going to be Mike Jones for the IBF welterweight. That took place in 2012. Now, I want to put in perspective why I say that's the biggest fight. It's not his fault, but I'm just telling the truth. Mike Jones was undefeated at the time. They were fighting for a vacant title. So Mike Jones at the time had only won regional titles. He had never won the big one on a world level. And he was an eye test fighter, and many people across the web were heralding him as the next guy, right? Because he had beaten some decent fighters. He had beaten Henry Bruselas. He had beaten Soto Carras. So people were looking at that, but he's undefeated. He has a decent knockout record, not a stellar one, but a pretty decent one. So they looked at him as the next big guy. And then Randall Bailey comes in, and it's not a short notice fight, but the training for that fight wasn't the best because Randall was old. Randall was brought in basically to be a name on this dude's record for this eye test fighter to look good in front of the fans. And Randall was getting outboxed early in the fight. And then Randall catches him with basically it was a feint and a straight right down the pipe, drops Mike Jones. I think it was sometime in the middle of the fight. Near the end, and this is one of the highlight reels of the entire, division at that time. And if you go back, I don't think there's ever been a shot like this ever since. And near the end, I want to say it's round 11. Jones is coming in and he's starting to flurry because he realized there's a little bit of a desperation. He needs to get this guy out of there. Bailey's old. There's no reason he should be here at the championship rounds on his level because he's got a reputation. He's been told he's the next big thing. He's this legendary fighter. He's got to prove it. Take this old man out. So he's starting to flurry. He's coming in It's almost like watching Manny Pacquiao. If you watch the shots he's trying to throw, but he's doing it like a ghetto Manny Pacquiao. He comes in, and then Bailey does a step back. He steps back, and you can see he's setting the trap. And the trap he sets is beautiful because he lands a picture perfect uppercut right on the chin, drops Mike Jones. Jones tries to get up, but he's out of it. He's out of it. It's just done. Mike Jones would only fight one more fight immediately after this against Jaime Herrera, and then Herrera stopped him, and he was done. He didn't officially announce his retirement either, but he was never the same fighter after he got taken out by Randall Bailey. And again, I want to stress to you, Mike Jones was an eye test fighter, so I don't rate the guy individually, but I am saying that at that time, recent times, it was the biggest fight for Bailey, the biggest signature win at that time because of the fact he was an eye test fighter. I don't rate him, but the world rated Mike Jones. The world thought Mike Jones was going to be this huge superstar. And then what happens? Old Randall Bailey goes in there and does what Randall Bailey does, which is knock dudes out and takes him out. Now, there was a little bit of beef happening here with Randall Bailey and Devin Alexander because he was initially, what happened with the Mike Jones, just so you have a little bit more of the backstory. This fight happened on the undercard of Pac Bradley, the first Pac Bradley. Pacquiao was not supposed to lose to Timothy Bradley, but he lost to Timothy Bradley. So Bailey thought, okay, well, I beat the eye test guy that you told me to beat, so that means I should be able to get a shot at Tim Bradley, right? Didn't happen. Instead, they booked the rematch, Pac Bradley 2, and Bailey got screwed. So then Devin Alexander comes in, and they're talking about booking the fight for Devin Alexander, which at the time would have allowed him to do a title defense against a solid named, he was an up-and-coming fighter. Devin Alexander was not a bum. He was probably his prime at this time. But there's some beef, and it doesn't really go down like they planned for it to go down. So then eventually the fight gets signed. He fights Devin Alexander. Devin Alexander, from what I recall, completely outboxed him because Devin Alexander at that time was still inspired. Like his whole problem, his whole career from my lens is motivation. When he took his first loss, which was against Tim Bradley, believe it or not, and that loss should never have happened because it was a headbutt that caused it. Tim Bradley was known for headbutts. It's kind of like what Roy Jones said. The moment they took that away from him, the moment they took that away from Devin Alexander, he was never the same fighter. He would get signature wins. You know, Lucas Matisse is everybody's eye test fighter. Chino Maidana, people liked him. But generally speaking, he was never that top level fighter, and he never really tried nearly as hard as he did prior to when that headbutt happened with Bradley. So when the fight happens with Bailey, this is probably arguably Devin Alexander's best overall performance outside of the Junior Witter fight from my lens. I'm stressing that, from my lens. The fight against Junior Witter I thought was amazing the way he did it. People give him credit for Matisse. I don't, but to me, the Junior Witter fight was signature, and then the Randall Bailey performance was signature. Those were the two best fights from my eyes of his whole career, Devin Alexander. So then Randall Bailey takes that loss. He loses the IBF title. He goes on to have a few more fights. He gets some knockouts. He gets some soft pieces. Now, he meets Jeff Horn. And I argue two things. One, Jeff Horn was significantly underrated going in that fight. And he's always been underrated. Like NSB calls him a bum. And the truth is, at that time, Jeff Horn was very hungry. Jeff Horn was out for blood. He wanted to make a name. He wanted to make a statement. He wanted to provide for his family. He gave interviews that said, I'm here because I want to do for my family. We're tired of being broke. We're tired of being poor, and I want to go for greatness. So Jeff Horn actually stops Randall Bailey, stops him, takes him 7 rounds to do it. Nobody at that point had done what Jeff Horn had done to Randall Bailey. Nobody. Randall Bailey had taken losses. He had taken decision losses. He got stopped by Juan Urango. Yes. He got stopped by Miguel Cotto. Yes. He got stopped by Hurtado. Yes, this is true. But nobody had made a stoppage. Nobody had stopped. I'm talking stoppage as far as you quit on the stool, whatever, where you make your opponent submit. Nobody had done that or come close to doing that to Randall Bailey. Bailey hasn't boxed since. I'll get to that in a moment. So then he disappears. Does Randall Bailey? This is in 2016. He disappears from the business. We don't know what's happening to him. Sometime around, I want to say 2018, maybe 2019, but somewhere around there, Bare Knuckle Fighting says that Randall Bailey's going to be fighting, and he's going to be in there. And he's going to be debuting for the first time. He might fight a couple fights, and people are excited because this is the knockout king. If he's able to do these blistering knockouts with boxing gloves on, how's he going to handle bare knuckle, and what's that going to look like? So there's this announcement, and it went out on Twitter, and it went out everywhere else, talking about he's going to be here, he's going to be a headliner. And then all we heard was that there's a news announcement, he's pulled out, and we don't know why. We never hear why. We never hear what the story is. We don't know what's happened. We don't know if he's okay. They never revisited it again. I'm here to give you the story about what happened in case you didn't know. Bailey. He gave some interviews. He finally opened up about what had happened, at least at a high level. He didn't give specifics, but just to kind of put a bow on it. So right now, Randall Bailey, he is officially retired. He never announced his retirement, but he has committed he's never going to box again. He made this decision 2 years ago. He didn't give a reason why, but he ultimately said, yeah, he's done. He's not going to do it. Based on his interview, I get the suspicion that he's just tired, and he said this, he alluded to it. I suspect he's just tired of the politics, and he's always been kind of against the politics of boxing. The situation with Devin Alexander the first time really screwed him over. The situation with Pacquiao, because he was supposed to get a Pacquiao fight if Pacquiao beat Bradley, but then Bradley beat Pacquiao. He didn't get the fight with Bradley, and so I think he was just very disenchanted with the business of boxing and just said, you know what, I'm done with this. I'm not going to do it anymore. So 2 years ago, he leaves the business. He joins a truck driving company. He drives trucks down in South Florida, and his job is to send belongings of people. This is kind of sad, but he transports belongings of people who died from COVID from the funeral homes. Think about that. It's a very morbid but a very humbling type of job, something you wouldn't have expected from him. But this is what he does. And so he has two things to watch out for. First, it's the morbidity of being around funeral homes. Second, he has to wear all sorts of PPE because of COVID and making sure that he's more careful because he's constantly exposed to people. He's exposing himself to the belongings of people who died from COVID, right? So they might still have the disease. Then there's people that have handled it since. They may have the disease. So he's right in the middle of it, but he's doing a valuable service because this is something that needs to happen. And so he basically gave a high-level statement about the whole bare knuckle, about what happened. And he just basically said, you know what? I street fight better than I box, period, point blank. If that fight had gone on, that dude would have got punished. But he's also said that the politics and everything just got to him, and he was tired of the politics in the boxing business. And I suspect there was politics in BKFC as well as the reason why he pulled out of the fight. Something didn't go the way he wanted, and they were playing games. Either they promised him something and then rescinded it, or decided they weren't going to let him fight, maybe because of his age or whatever it is. But he really wasn't in the mix on this one. So I want to now give a summary just to kind of give my highlight reel for Randall Bailey for fights that you should look at so you can learn about this dude. First of all, I do recommend you watch the Jeff Horn fight because I think it's important to pay attention to how Jeff Horn was able to dismantle Randall Bailey the way that he was. That had nothing to do with age. Jeff Horn had a style that should have told people Manny Pacquiao was in trouble if he didn't train for this dude. But so many people dismissed Jeff Horn and didn't pay attention to the fight footage. They didn't give him a chance. And so when Horn does what he does in a fight, stress that, goes out there, causes, Manny wasn't even paying attention to the presser. He was texting on his phone. He didn't have train. He didn't do it like he needed to because he took the guy lightly because he didn't watch footage. Roach didn't watch footage. Most of the people online didn't watch footage. We saw what happened. Watch, I guarantee you, that fight with Jeff Horn and Randall Bailey will open your eyes to, you know what, Manny really had to train for this dude. He's underrated and he's hungry. He's coming. He's really hungry. What would happen after this now is that Horn got a big head. He got very excited, especially with the Mundine knockout. He got a big head, and he took Tim Tszyu lightly, and it happened. It is what it is, and of course, he may be retired as well. But getting back to Bailey, I just want you to think about the fight and watch the fight between Horn and Bailey first so you can understand where we ended with Randall Bailey. Then go back and watch some of these other fights. And I would start after Bailey with Mike Jones. Now, I'll give you a little bit more story about Mike Jones. With the Mike Jones fight in particular, again, Bailey was supposed to fight the winner of Pacquiao Bradley. That didn't happen. Then comes the nonsense with Devin Alexander. That doesn't initially happen, right? Not initially. Apparently, Andre Berto was in the mix as well. He was supposed to fight Andre Berto, and Andre Berto flaked. We don't know the specifics on this one. He fights Bailey, fights Jan Savek, and he has to wait before he gets a title shot. Devin Alexander steps up, takes the fight. We saw what happened on this one. But Mike Jones is the highlight of this guy's career. Watch that fight, watch the knockout. It'll teach you some things about how good this guy really was. Jackson Bonsu. Jackson Bonsu, if you remember Nassim Hamed versus Saeed Lawal, and if you don't, I'll describe it to you because it doesn't take that much. They come out and Hamed hits him with a single shot and Lawal goes down. Lawal never landed a single shot on Hamed. Hamed just basically pieced him with 3 punches. It was 100%, 3 punches, and Lawal was done. It was the worst mismatch, I think, in boxing history that I can recall, because Lawal, it looked like he didn't even try. He was deer in the headlights and the whole nine. This was not that type of fight. Bonsu was trying, but Bonsu, according to Bailey, there were things that he saw from previous fights that caused him to believe he was greatly exposed off a left hook. And so that's what he lands, and he takes him out in the first round. But Bonsu tried, but the point is that Bonsu is nowhere near Bailey's class, because Bailey was able to piece him with a single type of shot to get him out of there. Francisco Figueroa, which is one of Bailey's all-time favorite types of knockouts, because Bailey actually got hurt in that fight a little bit. He got wobbled, and apparently Figueroa was fighting a little bit dirty, which we know that tends to happen at times. And he goes in there, and this is for him winning the IBF junior welterweight title, by the way, the eliminator rather, by the way. 4th round knockout, takes him out of there. This was beef, right? These two guys, they were having an issue in the ring, before the ring, and it made for a good fight to watch. Francisco Figueroa, I think. Dimitrio Ceballos. This was the first time, I think, that Randall Bailey almost killed somebody in the ring. You need to watch this fight. You need to watch that one. Dimitrio Ceballos. It happened in Pennsylvania. You got to watch this fight, because after he knocked him the heck out, and it was a brutal knockout, this Ceballos was on the ground, out. He was out. He was not responsive for a little bit of a while. Eyes open, but he was not responsive. It reminded me of the knockout Jeff Horn laid on Anthony Mundine. Actually, it reminded me a lot of that one, but Bailey hit him a lot harder. 3rd round knockout. Definitely watch that one. Carlos Gonzalez. Gonzalez is, this was one of the earlier fights. So Vince Phillips was supposed to be the fight for Gonzalez. Vince Phillips falls out. Randall Bailey steps in. So it's a late step in, and he's young. Bailey, he's young, but he's at that point 100% knockout ratio, so he's dangerous. He's young, but he's dangerous. This fight here gave him the WBO junior welterweight title win. The Gonzalez fight here, there was nothing stylistically brilliant that any guy really did on this one. The signature here is that you got a guy, and we see it all the time, that's young, that's hungry, up and coming, goes in there and shocks the world against the champion and makes a name for himself. And then from there, you expect him to go on to bigger, better things. And he mostly did, but it's good to watch the fight to kind of get a sense of the rise of Randall Bailey. But I would watch this one last. And the reason I would watch it last, basically go backwards in his career. Why? Because I think it's important that you go backwards rather than forwards with someone like Bailey, so you can appreciate where we ended up, which means he stylistically was the same fighter when he began, which means he was a knockout artist, but he was nowhere near as defensively good as he eventually became. I think the best of him was his mid-level career, arguably, in my opinion, especially when he was fighting Juan Urango, who did stop him. But the point is, Randall put a good showing in that fight, in my opinion. When he fought Miguel Cotto, I don't think that he was all there 100% as far as the defensive stylist guy that he became. When he stopped relying as much on landing that shot up front, I think that that's when he became a better fighter overall. But the problem is, by that point, it was too late. He had already taken enough losses to signature fighters, and it was hard for him to get those big fights. But then when he met Mike Jones, you saw really the best of Randall Bailey that night, even though he was getting clipped, because it's like, not only can he land that hand on you, but he does have those signs of defensive brilliance still shining through. So to me, Randall Bailey went out there and did what he needed to do and entertained the boxing business for a very long time. He was in the business for 20 years and he fought some really good fighters. He never fought the ultimate crust, right? He never fought a Floyd Mayweather level fighter. He didn't get the Pacquiao because of politics. We knew there was a lot going on at the time, but you can kind of imagine the kind of threat he would have played against somebody like Pacquiao for sure, because we saw how Pacquiao got caught by Marquez, right? So I think he should be celebrated as a fighter. I think he's one of the better fighters in the business, my opinion. This is my opinion. And I don't think he gets the credit that he deserves for being as good as he really was. And I think his career lasted just long enough and he was able to hopefully make enough money where he feels satisfied with the career. And I think he just got tired of the business. I think he loves boxing, but he just got tired of the business and said, it's time for me to hang this up and go another direction. And then I'll wrap up with just a note here that I think was a missing opportunity. He never got to fight guys like Ali Fanica, who I think would have been a good stylistic fight for him to take at that time, because he was roughly on the rise around the same time as Randall Bailey. But the problem is Fanica had never fought outside of his home country for the vast majority of his career. But the reason I would have liked to see that fight is Ali Fanica was very effective against guys that were like Randall Bailey, and we might have seen a total different picture of the state of boxing in 2016 if they had fought. Because you got to remember, Ali Fanica had fought and beat guys like Zahir Rahim, which nobody thought he was going to beat Zahir Rahim. He went really, really good with Nate Campbell. Nobody thought he was going to be able to toe-to-toe that well with Nate Campbell. So Ali Fanica was another good fighter. And I think stylistically, just seeing those two tangle would have been very entertaining, and we would have seen a whole different scope of boxing. I don't know that I think he would have beat Pacquiao. I think he could have caught him, just like Marquez could have. I don't think he would have had a chance against that version of Floyd Mayweather at that time. I think Floyd would have been too much, too evasive, would never have gotten caught with the shot. However, I say that we don't know if Randall Bailey would have been able to land that shot on just a catch, just like Shane Mosley was able to land the shot on Floyd. But I just think Bailey's not nearly as fast as a Shane Mosley to have been able to land that. Regardless of this, we missed some compelling fights because he didn't get the chance that he was promised from whoever for the winner of Pacquiao Bradley, and that would have shaken up the whole division. This is my shout out, Lifeblood of Boxing, for Mr. Randall Bailey, the Knockout King. I'm glad to see he's still healthy and he's making a living and he's doing what he wants to do, and he stepped away from the sport and he still has his facilities intact and he's still healthy and he's doing well. And so if he listens to the podcast, hope he does, I would love to talk to him anytime, just because I think I would love to hear some stories around some of these boxing business fiascos that we hear about, right? We hear about them, but we don't understand. We don't understand how can these things happen all of a sudden. And I say that because remember, in the era of Don King, fights were getting booked. We saw them. Fights were getting made. With Don King and Bob Arum back in the days, they were happening. When HBO was still a thing, fights were happening. All of a sudden, it seems like when ESPN steps forward and HBO steps out, it's harder to make fights. When Fox steps in, it's harder to make fights. And it'd be nice to try to get another perspective on why that is. What we do know is that there are certain biases on networks where networks want to see certain fighters, which I don't think should be in play. I don't think it should be the network's business. And then we know there's certain promoters like Bob Arum who will trash their own fighters and cause them harm, from a promotional perspective. We know that's a thing. We don't think it should be, but we know that it is. So we know there's a lot of this, but the question is really, what more can we glean out of why these things happen and why these fights don't happen that we like to see when we want to see them? And what's changed in the business that's caused it to be increasingly more difficult to make some of these fights happen. So Randall Bailey, folks,